Hey there, everybody. I'm Mike DiLisio.
I'm Chris Yi.
And I'm Wendy Yi.
Today, we're going to be taking a look at My Shelfie, a game from two pretty acclaimed designers, especially of the last few years. This is Phil Walker Harding and Matthew Dunstan. Many of our favorite games have been created by these two designers. So, in My Shelfie, is that going to reach those high levels? I don't know. It's a game where you're trying to gain the most points by placing items into your legally distinct shelving unit that might perhaps come from a Swedish bulk furniture chain. You think?
May or may not.
Or not.
I don't. Interesting. They're called Catlix shelves.
Legally distinct. Let me show you how the game plays, and then we'll come back. Okay, here we see a setup for a two-player game of My Shelfie. In a 3 or 4 player game, the central board, which is known as the living room board, would have more tiles. All the spots with the 3 dots would be filled for a 3-player game, and in a 4-player game, every one of those kind of tan-colored spots would be filled. The other difference between a 2 to a 3 to a 4-player game is that you've got 2 common goal cards. These are kind of goals you're racing to achieve before the other player. In a 2-player game, you have an 8-point token and a 4-point token. In a 3 or 4-player game, you're going to have more points in that stack because you're going to have more players that are kind of racing for those goals. You also see a personal goal card that each player here would have. These would be normally kept face down because these are personal objectives and you don't want other people to know what you're going for. But for the purposes of the overview, I'm keeping them face up. This would be a first player marker. All right, on your turn, it's very simple. You are going to be drafting 1, 2, or 3 tiles from this living room board, and you're going to be placing them into a single column in your bookshelf here, which is denoted by this plastic piece, which is very reminiscent to games like Connect 4, which you may have been familiar with as a young child. All right, so the rules about drafting are that the tiles that you draft have to be adjacent to each other. They have to be touching, and every tile you take has to have at least one open side. Okay, so for example, I could draw these 2 tiles because they have open sides here and here, and they are adjacent to each other. But I couldn't draft these 3 tiles because this is the only tile of the 3. Actually, these 2 are the only ones that have open sides. This one in the middle is surrounded. I can't go diagonally, things along those lines. What you're going to be thinking about when you're drafting tiles is there's a couple of things. One, of course, you're going to be looking at your personal goal card. You want to have tiles of the corresponding colors in that spot on your bookshelf. The more of those that you can get at the end of the game will determine the number of points you're going to get at the end of the game. You also are looking at the common goals. So, and there are a bunch of these. There's only 2 that are going to be in each game, but there's a bunch we didn't use. There's also obviously a bunch of personal goal cards I didn't show. But you're going to be looking at those. So in this case, you are trying to have 2 rows in your bookshelf that have 5 different tiles. And in this one, you're trying to get the same tile in each of the 4 corner spots, here, 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 and here, to be the same color. So those are some things that you're going to be considering. The other thing you're going to be considering is trying to group same colored tiles in groups on your shelf, and you're going to get more points for the most for those depending. So at the end of the game, every group of 6 or more of the same type of tile will give you 8 points. 5 will give you 5, 4 will give you 3, and 3 will give you 2. All right. There's an equal distribution of the 6 different types of tiles within the game. All right. So on my turn, I'm looking at my goal card here. I know I want to get a yellow tile on the bottom left. Maybe I would just go ahead and draft both of those tiles. When you draft them again, you have to put them in the same column, but you can put them in any order you want. So let's say that I'm going to slide that right down there, and I'm going to slide that right on top. Now I already have one of my personal goals achieved. That's 1 point at the end of the game. Hopefully I would be able to get more and more and more. The next player is going to go. They're going to be doing the same thing. They have a pink down there in the bottom left. Maybe they would draft these 2 and place them in their board in such a way that they also are going to have one of their goals completed. All right. So you're going to continue drafting tiles from the board until it gets to a point where there are no groups of tiles that you could draft more than one at a time. So in other words, in such a configuration, I'll actually show you here in the rule book because they give you a nice little example of it here. where you can only get one, and I'm trying to find that spot here in the book for you. Here we go. Something along those lines. So you see that there's only item tiles without any other adjacent tiles. So if it gets to that point, then that's going to refill the board, and you're going to continue to take your turns. The game end is going to be triggered by the first player who completely fills their bookshelf, and they're going to take the 1-point bonus token. And at the end of the game, your points are going to be scored by, again, your personal goal card, any of the common goals that you may have scored, and groupings of like tiles in your bookshelf. You're going to add all those points together. Whichever player has the most points is going to win My Shelfie. All right, well, that's the overview. Let's tell you what we think about it. All right, so not much of a overview because it's a very simple game.
It really is.
There's not a whole lot rules-wise. It's something I think you could easily teach to somebody, even if they don't play a lot of modern hobby games, in a matter of minutes. So what was this experience like for you? What do you think?
You know what? I instantly thought of Connect 4 and my childhood of placing those little things in the grid. I loved that as a kid, and I think that this tactile element of it makes it very cool.
It does. This could easily have been a flat board,
Yes.
and they say put things in a column.
Make gravity happen
Right.
on a,
It
on a
could have
2D
even
space.
been a roll and write if you think about it. Where you're
It made me
drawing
think
on a
of-
board.
yeah,
But do we think that the components, and it's not a large box, as you can see, it's not like they put it in a huge ticket to ride size box. Do you think those components add to the experience?
I think so. Like when
I
you
think
said,
they definitely do.
dropping it in and hearing the click clack. It's a silly little thing, but it does. It feels more like you're filling in your shelf. This is a theme that I can think of one other game that's done it, the Shelfie Stacker game.
Yes.
But it's neat because this one has that element of you are putting different types of things into your shelf. It's not all just board games, so it's not just the wink, smile, and nod at board games. But clearly, even with the name My Shelfie, that is, Shelfie is a term that...
Sure.
Are you saying it's on the nose?
Yeah, I mean, maybe book, what do you call those? Book lovers might also use the term Shelfie, but
Right.
that was like the only thing I looked at this, I thought, But then I saw the designers' names. I saw Cranio doing kind of a lighter weight game, and,
Right.
and I was more interested. I like it. I like that tactile feel. I like the bookshelves. Is it a bit overproduced? A little bit. But I found one benefit of having those standing shelves.
Okay, I want to see if it's the same thing I was thinking of.
When you're sitting around the table, it's actually easier to kind of see what other players have on their board.
That was going to be the point. I'm glad you brought that up because that was going to be my point, was that I think that there is an actual nice benefit, just like you said, because you are racing for public
Public objectives.
objectives.
Yeah,
and so
definitely.
it's nice to, easier to just look around quickly and say, okay, I've got no chance at that one, or we're going to really be pushing to race for this one. And it's easier to see that way. I agree with that.
I liked the interaction in the game, so I'm always hit or miss with types of interaction that I enjoy, but I really liked what was going on here. It made me think of Mahjong, but not necessarily like the official Mahjong, but like the weird app version that you play where you have to have like the sides available.
Right.
Like I liked that aspect of it, except that when I was playing with Mike took everything that I wanted.
Look, I mean, this is what happens when you play against a master Shelfie expert.
Why you gotta
it's
be
fair.
so rude?
Pretty sure I lost that game. But the one thing I do want to bring up component-wise, because I think we all agree that the shelves are nice, if not necessary, but they do have some functional use. There's a word that oftentimes gets bandied about in board game discussions, and that's the word fiddly. And it can mean different things to different people. But there is one element of the game that I do feel like is fiddly, and I'll try to explain what I mean by that. You have that central board, the living room, that you're grabbing the tiles from, and there are some rules behind that. They have to have an open spot. They have to be adjacent. It's very easy to bump those things around. And picking them and refilling the board, I found that to be a little fiddly. Where I'm worried about bumping pieces. I'm worried about making sure that things line up. This may be a me thing where if there's a grid on a board and tiles are supposed to fit in a grid, if they go outside of that grid, I start getting a little bit freaked out. And that happens a lot in this one. I felt like I had to constantly be moving. Now that might be a me problem, but I did want to mention it. I found it a little fiddly.
So once they're in the bookshelf, you're fine though, because
they're
do
good
not
in the
move.
bookshelf. They're not moving. I love them in the bookshelf. But
those are gridded up perfectly.
Yeah. So
Mike
did that
likes the
bother
color
any of
inside
you
the
at all,
lines.
or was that solely a Mike problem?
No.
During the setup, like the actual putting out the tiles regularly throughout the game, I can see that being a little bit fiddly.
Yeah.
But the bumping wasn't a big deal to me.
All right.
Right. I know whereabouts it's supposed to be, but when I reach in, I will sometimes it's like
Clean
I
up
don't
the
know.
line.
It's just that little bit of I would prefer you be straighter lined here. I think that the grabbing the tiles mechanism is good.
Yeah.
Right. It is a little bit tricky.
Yeah.
You have to kind of reiterate to people sometimes. They have to have an available side face out at the start of your turn.
Right.
Not when you grab one to expose it, because then
Right.
any tile is eligible.
Sure.
And you could do a game that way, but I think it would add so much thinkiness and it would slow the game down to a crawl. So I'm glad they didn't do that.
Agreed.
Yes.
Yeah. And so it's just kind of that outside edge, almost that American computer mahjong type thing. But I agree. I think the slowest, or the thing that does slow the game down a bit, is there's only a few tiles left. Refill time. If there was a way that wasn't there, that'd be amazing. Just have a big boggle dome, So I don't know. Sometimes people say, this is one of those games that seems like it'd be better as an app. And I only half agree with that, because we talked about the fun tactile actual shelf part, but that little board in the middle, I do kind of wish there was a magic speed setup.
Well, Chris, since you were bringing that up, unless there's another big topic we want to cover, why don't you just give your final thoughts, what you think of the game as a whole, and what score you're going to give it?
Yeah, absolutely. I love this duo of designers. Phil Walker-Harding, in particular, is one of my favorite. A lot of his games show up in my top 100. And Matthew Dunstan is one who's I know he's done work a lot, and so I do like a lot of his games. He's also growing in my estimation, so it shouldn't be a surprise. I like this one a lot. I'm giving this one an 8 because I think that it's a breezy game. It's fun. I like the different methods of scoring. I like when, and Phil Walker-Harding does this in multiple games, when there's those public objectives and it's a race for them, and they're worth diminishing points. So you have that push and that pull of, do I work towards this objective, or do I work towards building a big group for endgame scoring? And there's nice trade-offs and payoffs, and so I like it a lot. It's an 8 from me.
Very nice. Okay, well, I'm giving this a 7.5. Basically, everything that Chris said about the designers, about the public objectives, I love all that. I do wish that there was even more scoring almost. I wish that it wasn't just those 3 things. It keeps it light, it keeps it simple, keeps it sweet. I'm all for that. But yeah, I almost want more, I guess, from it. But at the end of the day, I think it's fun, I think it's great, and it lives up to what these gentlemen have made in the past.
Yeah, and we didn't plan it this way, but we're close. But I'm at a 7, so we went 8, 7.5, and a 7. It's definitely something I would recommend, and it's a game that I would never turn down playing, and so that's why I feel comfortable with it being a 7. Am I going to be jumping to get it off the shelf? Probably not, because I do agree with you, Wendy. I think that this is one where I wish there was a little bit more, because it does feel much like an app to me. And sometimes I feel like the setting up and putting all the stuff out, and that takes almost as long as the game does. The game is super quick, super breezy. And so it's good. I recommend it, but it's not something that I feel like is knocks it out of the park. And I do want to make it clear that that whole fiddly thing, that didn't factor into my score. I mean, that's a very minor point, but I brought it up because fiddly is discussed a lot, and I thought this is a perfect example that I can bring up for what fiddly means to me. But good game, solid game, and again, these designers, they know how to take a simple rule set and make a nice, pleasant game out of it. And I think this fulfills that. All right, well,
absolutely.
That is My Shelfie. Until next time, I'm Mike DiLisio.
I'm Chris Yi.
I'm Wendy Yi.
Have fun putting together furniture. Make sure that you get somebody with you to help you lift. It's a team lift process. And maybe when you're done, have some lovely Swedish meatballs, huh?